when I was writing The Crash of 2016, I spent a fair amount of time studying the history of economic crashes in the United States. And one of the ones, the crash of 1856 is fairly well documented. The crash of 1770 is poorly documented, but it's there. But the crash of 1920 through 1929, or the bubble of 1920 through 29, and the crash of 1929 is very well documented. This was my grandfather's generation. My grandfather came to the United States in 1917 from Norway on my father's side. On my mother's side, my relatives go back to, well before the Revolutionary War. They go back to the mid-1600s. But on my dad's side, my father's father and mother both came from Norway in 1917 or thereabouts. And so my grandfather's generation, which would be for millennials probably great-grandpa or great-great-grandpa or grandma, they were the last one to actually see libertarian/Republican economics sold to the American people in 1920. In the election of 1920, Warren Harding ran on a campaign platform that had two pieces to it. One was cutting taxes, the top tax rate then on millionaires and billionaires, or what would today be billionaires. The top tax rate was 91%. Warren Harding ran on the platform of dropping that to 25%, which he did when he became president in 1921. So number one, tax cuts. And number two, privatization and deregulation. The slogan that Warren Harding used was less government in business, more business in government. In other words, deregulation, privatization. And the conservatives, I'm reluctant to use that word because I don't think that Everett Dirksen would agree with any of this, but the Republicans, the right-wingers of their day, the libertarians of their day, they sold America this bill of goods in 1920 and actually won the election, got a Republican House, a Republican Senate, a Republican president, and on the idea that cutting taxes, deregulating businesses, especially banking and Wall Street, and the oil industry, which had just been aggressively attacked in the preceding generation by both Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, also Republicans, but progressives. Deregulating all these industries would be a good thing. It would kick off prosperity. And it looked that way for the first couple of years. 1921, 1922, 23, 24 saw this incredible rise in the stock market. Harding died, and as Vice President Coolidge came in as president. And in the next election cycle, Coolidge was elected. And then, as I recall, Coolidge died too. Maybe not, but yeah, actually, I think he served out his term, and then Hoover was elected. And it was called the Coolidge Prosperity while Coolidge was president. Basically, he didn't do anything. Silent Calvin, right? He just, we're going to let the billionaires run the country. And the stock market just continued to climb. Now, working people's wages went down during the Roaring '20s. Poverty increased during the Roaring '20s. Inequality went up substantially during the Roaring '20s. A lot of people think because it was called the Roaring '20s that it was great for everybody. It wasn't. It was great for the 1%, or maybe the top 10%. And then it crashed, and you've got this generation of people, my grandfather's generation, who both heard the sales pitch in the 20s, bought it, voted for this stuff. My grandfather wasn't among them. He was a socialist, but, voted and bought. The majority of Americans voted for this stuff and then saw it collapse. We now have another generation that is seeing this, and that's the millennials. They are seeing these policies. Just 30 years ago, virtually every state in the country required hospitals and health insurance companies to be not-for-profit organizations. Over the last 34 years of Reaganomics and deregulation, most states have done away with those laws, and a lot of your hospitals and insurance companies are now for-profit corporations. Costs have exploded. Used to be if you wanted to start a school, you had to be a not-for-profit in most states. Now you can start for-profit schools. The cost of education has exploded. Social Security, which was created because people had their savings in the stock market, and the stock market wiped them out. social, and starting in the 80s with Reagan, they started selling this idea that Social Security is not going to be here for you. Social Security is going to go away. We need to privatize. Remember, Bush tried to privatize Social Security in 2005 after he was reelected. He said, I got the political capital from my war in Iraq, and I'm going to use it to privatize Social Security. Didn't work out, but he tried. And you got some you got Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson, running around talking about this stuff, these crazies. But now we've got a generation, the millennials, who are looking around. Now, they may say they like libertarianism. Libertarianism says, hey, decriminalize drugs, decriminalize prostitution, but do all this economic, political stuff, conservative stuff. But I think that they don't understand what libertarians are really all about.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 866-987-THOM.
But that said, they're the first generation in modern living memory to actually experience firsthand what's going on. Look at the student debt, for example.